Hi everyone, it's great to be here. My name is Janette Kim, and I'm one of the directors of a different research lab based at Columbia University called the Urban Landscape Lab. And we're based at the Graduate School of Architecture there. My partner is a landscape architect, and my background is in architecture. We're an organization that focuses on the intersection between ecology and the built environment. And we've done a couple of projects, a kind of range of projects involving media work, design prototypes, design charrettes, and tours of the city that include a kind of canal trip of Flushing River. But tonight I wanted to show you a project that we're working on called Underdome. This is a project I'm doing with a designer named Eric Carver that's been supported by the Van Alen Institute. And this project is an online guide, and hopefully soon a print publication, that is a kind of architect's voter's guide to energy. So the idea is to provide this kind of overview or kind of analysis of the varied approaches to energy and the built environment. It's written by architects for architects in a way to try to engage a more political context behind energy. But I'm also really interested to present this project to you tonight as a kind of way to see how you, the kind of very active practitioners in the energy world, could kind of respond to this booklet. So what you see here is the homepage of our website. The website basically maps out a spectrum of sometimes contending, sometimes affiliated positions on energy in order to kind of unpack the political implications behind these approaches. So the idea is that if we don't all have just one approach to energy, but are kind of managing or negotiating a large set of options and approaches, what's important to us in this project is to ask how these varied approaches often have implicit or explicit narratives about governance, political participation, ideas of lifestyle, cultural norms, and images of the city that we may or may not want to promote. So what I'm going to do today, actually let me just go back for a second. What I'm going to do tonight is take you on a really quick tour through this website. We've organized these examples of kind of energy agendas around 4 major topics. Power, which looks at governance; territory, which looks at the kind of changing contemporary city; lifestyle, which I think explains itself; and risk, which looks at the way that we react collectively to uncertain futures. So first, with regards to power, we're looking at the way that governments, corporations, organizations, and individuals have a kind of potential to restructure energy. And just to show you a couple of the approaches that we've mapped out in this website, we can look at ideas of a kind of, let's say, the notion of a strong state that we would visualize through the stimulus bill, or in many ways a kind of incentive-based model that looks at partnerships between government and let's say, landlords or businesses. We can look at, in a very different end of the spectrum, a kind of focus in some projects on individual responsibility, a kind of consumer volunteerism. So you're looking here at the example of the DOE's Energy Hog program, which tells you that, yes, the energy bill is one bill that you can control, and that there's a kind of behavioral modification that can be produced by this information campaign. We can also look at the way that nonprofit organizations or grassroots organizations are really forming new kinds of networks of influence that sometimes work outside of government, but also sometimes really depend on it for funding resources as well. Okay, so if that's a quick tour of the power topic, we could look also at the topic of territory, which in this case of the Regional Plan Association's Project America 2050, for example, really looks at the way that we could encourage density as a way of kind of recognizing that networks of energy, transit, and exchange are often cutting across political boundaries. But on a slightly different end of this approach, as a kind of contending position, we can look at the idea of unplugging, of removing oneself from this grid, as a kind of notion of self-sustenance, as a kind of removal from this kind of dense accumulation of urban sites. And then similarly, I think we can ask questions about the notion of planning and the question of of a kind of top-down, bottom-up model of planning. And here we're looking at a project by a French architect named Stéphane Malka that provides a kind of really curious hybrid between this very kind of megastructure of La Défense in Paris and a kind of grassroots, so-called colonizing of this space. Okay, so quick tour, on from territory to lifestyle. Some of the ideas we look at in lifestyle is to kind of question the way that energy programs reimagine lifestyle norms and behavior, both through marketing of lifestyles, but also the kind of emergence of subcultures, as the kind of hippie or dropout movement would have demonstrated in the 60s and 70s. So just to review a couple of examples of this issue, we look at strategies like the GE Data Visualization project that really asks us to be different kinds of consumers by being more informed about the energy uses that we engage in. Or we could look at notions of a kind of hedonistic approach that sort of accepts a certain kind of consumer-driven strategy. But we could also look at this as a kind of a way in which energy agendas are often tied to this notion of the American dream, this kind of ideal of kind of home ownership that's often represented through incentive programs or solar power reinvestment rebates or similar policies. And then we could also look at initiatives like the ones that are run by the Citizens Housing and Planning Council here in New York, based in New York, that look at the way that non-traditional housing types also can kind of work within the question of energy. And they look at ways of advocating changes to our laws to yes, allow more than 3 unrelated adults to live together, and therefore really shift the way that they're consuming energy. And then lastly, for our last topic, looking at risk, we're asking how when we're collectively dealing with uncertain futures, when we're looking at potential flooding, fire, disease, risks that will be exacerbated by climate change, how do we respond collectively? So we could look at, for example, the way that Arup engineers have a risk department that have been consulting groups like the Intercontinental Hotel Group about resilient approaches to risk management that in fact isolate their risk from a kind of collective spread. Or we can look at the way that insurance operates, for example, for coastal communities, as a way of kind of redistributing this risk in sometimes controversial ways and sometimes very necessary ways. Or, I guess I'm ending with the most controversial example, we could look at even the kind of proposal put forward by the Super Freakonomics text, engaging this idea of spewing a cloud of sulfur dioxide into the atmosphere to cool the Earth down. And so you can imagine the kind of questions of collective risk response and involvement really come to the fore. I invite you to our website, and I think the goal for, actually first I'll just tell you a little bit about how our website is structured. From the home page you can click on any icon, last slide, you can click on any icon and find examples, pros, cons, arguments, bibliographies, quotes and images that can represent these different positions. And then I would say our goal is really that architects and people kind of involved in dealing with energy would really use this as an opportunity to ask big questions and to think about the way that when we approach energy, we can also really engage in and really kind of provoke different attitudes towards public life. So thank you very much.